She thought it was just another flight, until a racist flight attendant decided she didn't belong. A black teen, traveling alone for the first time, finds herself unfairly targeted by an air hostess who insists she must leave her seat. Confused and humiliated, she watches as security is called to drag her off the plane. Passengers stay silent. No one moves, until one woman stands up. What happens next will shock everyone on board. Stay tuned to see how this teen's nightmare turns into a fight for justice, and the unexpected hero who refuses to stay quiet. The airport was buzzing with travelers. People hurried through security, checked their boarding passes, and rushed to their gates. Flight announcements echoed through the terminal. It was just another busy day. Among the crowd was Jada, a 17-year-old black girl traveling alone for the first time. She clutched her boarding pass, her hands slightly sweaty. It was a big day for her, her first solo flight. She had planned everything carefully, packed her bag neatly, and even arrived extra early. After passing security, she made her way to the gate and lined up to board. When it was her turn, she handed her pass to the agent, who gave her a quick smile and waved her through. She sighed in relief. So far, so good. Walking down the aisle, she looked for her seat. 12A, window seat. Perfect. She placed her backpack under the seat and buckled in, feeling excited but nervous. As she settled in, a flight attendant walked by, checking the passengers. Jada didn't think much of it, until the woman stopped right next to her. The air hostess, a tall woman with neatly tied blonde hair, glanced at Jada with a frown. Her eyes scanned Jada from head to toe. Jada felt uneasy, but stayed quiet. Then the hostess spoke. Her voice was firm. "Miss, can I see your boarding pass?" Jada blinked, confused. "Oh, sure." She reached into her hoodie pocket and handed it over. The hostess stared at the pass for a long moment. Then she sighed and shook her head. "You're not supposed to be here." Jada's heart dropped. Jada furrowed her brows. "What do you mean?" The air hostess folded her arms. "This isn't your seat." Jada looked down at her boarding pass. 12A. She was in the right place. "No, this is my seat," she said, pointing at the number above her. The hostess shook her head. "No, it's not. You need to come with me." Passengers nearby started glancing over. The woman in the seat next to Jada looked uncomfortable. Jada tried again, her voice calmer this time. "Ma'am, I'm sure this is my seat. Look." She showed the boarding pass again. The hostess barely glanced at it before waving a hand dismissively. "I don't care what that says. You're not supposed to be here." Jada felt her throat tighten. Why was she saying this? She swallowed hard. "I don't understand. What's the problem?" The hostess sighed dramatically. "I don't have time for this. Just step out for a moment." Jada's stomach churned. She glanced around, hoping someone would help, but most passengers stayed quiet, avoiding eye contact. She shook her head. "I didn't do anything wrong." The hostess's eyes narrowed. "Are you going to make this difficult?" Jada's hands trembled slightly. "I'm just trying to go to my destination, ma'am." The air hostess exhaled sharply. Then, with a quick motion, she turned toward the front of the plane and waved at another crew member. Another flight attendant, a younger man, approached. He looked at the scene, confused. "What's going on?" he asked. The hostess pointed at Jada. "She won't move." The young attendant hesitated. "But did she do something?" The hostess rolled her eyes. "Just get security." Jada's heart pounded. Passengers were now watching closely. Some exchanged whispers. Others looked uncomfortable. Jada took a deep breath, trying to hold back her tears. She had done nothing wrong. And yet, she was being treated like a criminal. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. More passengers turned to see what was going on. Some were just curious. Others looked annoyed. No one liked delays. A woman sitting across the aisle leaned toward her husband. "Why are they bothering that girl?" she whispered. A businessman in a navy suit frowned as he watched. He had seen the girl sit down quietly. She wasn't causing any trouble. So why was the flight attendant singling her out? Jada gripped her armrests tightly. She could feel her heart pounding. She glanced around, hoping someone, anyone, would speak up. No one did. The second flight attendant, the younger man, still looked confused. He glanced at Jada's boarding pass, then at the seat number above her. This actually seems correct," he said hesitantly. The air hostess gave him a sharp look. "Are you questioning me?" The man's mouth opened, then closed. He looked unsure, like he wanted to say something but didn't dare. Jada swallowed hard. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry. She turned to the hostess, her voice steady. "I don't understand why you're asking me to leave." The hostess scoffed. "Because I said so." Passengers whispered louder now. A woman with glasses 2 rows behind them shook her head. "This isn't right." The businessman sighed and reached for the call button. He pressed it. A small ding echoed through the cabin. Jada noticed and felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe someone would help. But the air hostess ignored the sound. Instead, she folded her arms and stared Jada down. "I'm not going to ask again. Stand up." Jada clenched her fists. Why was this happening? Then, the hostess did something that made her stomach drop. She turned to the young flight attendant and snapped, "Call security." Jada's blood ran cold. The young attendant hesitated. He looked uncomfortable. "Security? Are you sure?" he asked quietly. The hostess rolled her eyes. "Yes, I'm sure." Jada's breathing grew unsteady. Security? For what? She hadn't even raised her voice. She wasn't disturbing anyone. She had simply sat in her assigned seat. The young attendant sighed but obeyed. He walked to the front of the plane and made a call. Jada stared at the floor, trying to stay calm. "This can't be happening." The businessman shook his head. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. A few seats down, a woman with dark curly hair turned to her seatmate. "They wouldn't be doing this if she was white." More passengers whispered now. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others looked at the air hostess with suspicion. Minutes later, heavy footsteps echoed from the front of the plane. A security guard appeared. He was tall, with a stiff posture and a serious expression. "What's the issue?" he asked. The air hostess pointed at Jada. "She's refusing to leave." Jada's breath hitched. The guard turned to her. "Miss, I need you to come with me." Jada gripped the armrests even tighter. "But I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. The guard sighed. "Ma'am, I don't want to make this difficult. Please stand up." Tears burned in Jada's eyes, but she blinked them away. She had done nothing. Passengers watched silently. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, a loud, firm voice rang through the plane. "Hold on a second!" Every head turned toward the sound. A middle-aged woman in a crisp business suit stood up in the back of the plane. She wasn't having it. The cabin fell silent. All eyes turned to the woman standing at the back of the plane. She had short brown hair, sharp eyes, and an air of authority. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the aisle floor. "What exactly is going on here?" she demanded, looking directly at the security guard. The air hostess let out an annoyed sigh. "She's refusing to leave her seat." The woman crossed her arms. "And why should she leave?" The hostess blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," the woman said, her voice firm. "This girl is sitting in her assigned seat. What's the problem?" The security guard shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I was called here because she's causing a disturbance." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really?" "I've been sitting back there the whole time. You know what I saw? A young girl minding her own business, sitting quietly. You know what I didn't see? A disturbance." Jada's breath hitched. Someone was standing up for her. The air hostess clenched her jaw. "She doesn't belong here." Gasps rippled through the plane. The woman's eyes narrowed. And why exactly doesn't she belong here? The air hostess hesitated. She just doesn't. The woman let out a dry laugh. Wow, that's interesting. She turned to the security guard. Are you really going to drag this girl off the plane without a valid reason? The guard hesitated. He looked around at the watching passengers, many of whom were now murmuring in agreement with the woman. A voice from another row. She should stay. Another. This is wrong. Jada clutched the armrests, overwhelmed. For the first time since this nightmare started, she didn't feel completely alone. The woman turned back to the air hostess. I think you owe this young lady an apology. The air hostess's face burned red. The air hostess stiffened, her lips pressed into a thin line. I don't owe her anything, she snapped. Passengers let out murmurs of disapproval. The woman scoffed. So you're doubling down? She folded her arms. You got caught, and now you don't want to admit it. The hostess turned to the security guard. Do your job. The guard hesitated again. He glanced at Jada, then at the other passengers. He could feel the tension in the air. Slowly, he cleared his throat. I'm going to need to check the situation again. The hostess glared at him. We don't have time for this. The woman in the business suit took a step closer. Oh, we have plenty of time. This girl's not going anywhere. More passengers spoke up. Yeah, leave her alone. She paid for that seat. Let her stay. Jada's chest felt tight. So many people were defending her now. The air hostess looked around. She was losing control of the situation. She turned back to the security guard, her voice growing desperate. Just get her off the plane. The guard sighed. He pulled out his radio. We need the airline manager down here, he said. The air hostess's eyes widened. Passengers cheered softly. Jada blinked, stunned. For the first time, she felt hope. Minutes passed. The air inside the plane felt thick with tension. Passengers whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Jada sat frozen in her seat, her hands still gripping the armrests. She could barely process what was happening. Then, footsteps approached from the front of the plane. A middle-aged man in a navy blue airline uniform stepped in. He had silver-rimmed glasses and a name tag pinned to his shirt. His expression was calm but serious. What's going on here? He asked, looking around. The air hostess immediately pointed at Jada. She's refusing to leave her seat. The businessman in the suit scoffed. That's not what happened. The woman in the business suit folded her arms. This young lady was sitting in her assigned seat. Your flight attendant decided to target her for no reason. The manager's gaze shifted to Jada. Miss, can I see your boarding pass? He asked gently. Jada's hand shook as she reached into her pocket. She silently handed over the pass. The manager studied it for a moment, then looked up at the seat number. His face darkened. She's in the right seat. Gasps spread through the cabin. A few passengers let out quiet, I told you so, murmurs. Jada exhaled sharply. It felt like she had been holding her breath for an hour. The air hostess's face turned pale. That can't be right, she muttered. The manager's eyes narrowed. Are you questioning her boarding pass, or are you questioning me? The air hostess opened her mouth, then shut it. The manager took a deep breath. Come with me. The air hostess froze. Sir, The manager's voice was firm. Now. Jada watched in shock as the hostess hesitated, then finally turned and followed the manager toward the front of the plane. The second flight attendant, the younger man, visibly relaxed. It was clear that he had been uncomfortable the whole time, but didn't have the courage to step in. For a moment, the plane was silent. Then suddenly, applause. Passengers clapped. Some even cheered. The woman in the business suit smiled and patted Jada's shoulder. told you you weren't alone." Jada sat still, her heart racing. She could barely believe what had just happened. A few rows down, the businessman shook his head. "That was disgusting behavior." The woman next to him nodded. "I hope she gets fired." Minutes later, the manager returned. The plane grew quiet again. The manager cleared his throat and addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the situation. The flight attendant in question will not be working this flight." Jada felt her chest loosen. She had been so tense, so afraid that she'd be dragged off the plane for no reason. A few more passengers clapped again. The manager turned to Jada, his expression apologetic. "Miss, I am truly sorry for what you experienced today. This should never have happened." Jada swallowed hard. She didn't know what to say. The businessman beside her spoke up. "It's not just about her. It's about how easily this could have gone wrong. If no one spoke up, she would have been forced off for nothing." A few passengers murmured in agreement. The manager nodded. "You're right. We take these situations seriously, and there will be an internal investigation." Jada managed a small nod. She wasn't sure if that was enough, but it was something. The woman in the business suit leaned down. "You okay?" Jada took a deep breath. "Yeah, I think so." The woman smiled. "Good, because you deserve to be here, just like anyone else." Jada's throat felt tight again, but this time, not from fear, from gratitude. The captain's voice suddenly echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are ready for takeoff." Jada sank into her seat. Finally, she could relax. The plane cabin settled. The murmurs faded. The passengers turned back to their own business, though many still shot glances at Jada, some sympathetic, some thoughtful. Jada sat still, her heart finally slowing down. She had fought back. Well, not really. She had tried to stay quiet, tried to avoid trouble. But trouble had found her anyway, and yet people stood up for her. The businessman beside her gave a nod. "You handled that well." Jada let out a small, nervous chuckle. "I didn't really do anything." The woman in the business suit smiled. "You didn't have to. The truth was enough." Jada looked down at her hands. Maybe she was right. She glanced around the cabin. Some passengers smiled at her in encouragement. Others simply looked away, pretending they hadn't just witnessed everything. The plane began to move, taxiing toward the runway. The reality sank in. She was still here. She had won. She turned toward the window, watching as the airport buildings blurred past. The roar of the engines grew louder. She took a deep breath. She was going to be okay. As the plane lifted off the ground, soaring into the sky, Jada finally allowed herself to relax. She leaned back in her seat, closed her eyes, and let go of the fear. Because today, she had learned something important. She wasn't alone.